Hi, everybody. My name is Charlie Parman. I'm a very grateful recovering alcoholic. Because I'm a member of the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and with the grace of the power that I found in the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't found necessary to take a drink for 6,153 days today, one day at a time, and for this I'm very grateful. It's sure good to be back up here in Canada again, and at the Nottawasaga Inn, doing a good big book study and being with many friends we met up here last year, and getting to meet many new people and new friends we're going to make this year. Joe and I always like to say when we first start one of these things that we do not consider ourselves to be the gurus of the big book. We certainly are not the experts on anything whatsoever. We're just two guys that met some years ago. We became interested in some ideas about the big book. We studied a long time together. Hopefully we've learned one or two things about it. And we love to share what little bit of information we have with other people. We most certainly do not speak for AA as a whole. You are free to agree or disagree with anything that we say as you wish to. The opinions that you'll hear us express will be our own as of this weekend, and they do change from time to time. And anything that we say that you can't reconcile with what's in the big book or other conference-approved material, just don't pay any attention to it. Because after all, that's what we're really here to discuss. We try to keep these things as informal as we possibly can. You know, we like to laugh. We love to cut up. We love to tell jokes. We love to have a good time. We think that's what this is all about. We're going to find that in the big book there's a lot of humor. Bill Wilson had a subtle sense of humor that we'll find it running throughout the big book as we go through it and look at it. And we want you to enjoy this with us. Let's let it all hang out this weekend. Let's keep it as informal as we possibly can. And let's all have a good time while we're here. Some of these sessions become quite long. And I know that the mind is only going to absorb about what the rear end will stand. Some of you may find it necessary to get up and move around a little bit during one of these sessions. And if you feel the need to do that, please feel free to do so. It won't bother us at all. If you feel the need to get up and get a cup of coffee, go right ahead and do that. It isn't necessary, as far as we are concerned, to always wait until break time. If you feel the need to get up and get rid of a cup of coffee, please feel free to do that also. Now, we don't want anybody in pain. We want to have a good time this weekend. So let it all hang out and let's enjoy ourselves and have a lot of fun while we're here. Joe?
My name is Joe, and I'm a real alcoholic. Through God's grace and because this program works in my life, I've been necessary to take a drink since March of 1962, and for this I'm grateful. It is good, as Charlie said, to be here for another big book. And I think each time we sit down, and I think that this is the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, as John says, that through the first 100 people, we've been given the opportunity to live a life that we didn't know existed. And we've found this wonderful way of life through this program called Alcoholics Anonymous. And each time as we sit down and do the big book, it's a new experience for Charlie and I. And I think that we stand in awe to have the opportunity to be a part of Alcoholics Anonymous, and particularly the big book seminar. It all began for us as some years ago, as someone was talking about today. I felt through circumstances of my life, I had begun to work with alcoholics some 15 years ago, and it was at that time that I felt, although, I had been in recovery for about 9 years, I began to have a yearning to learn more about the big book. I don't know why over 9 years I had, read the book and excerpts and used it throughout my life to affect my recovery. But through other people, I felt a great need to learn more about the big book. I began to study the big book each each night, and I would just study 15 or 20 minutes, a half hour at a time. I had very little success, and I began to get some ideas about concepts about the plan of the book. And I began to share this with other AA members. I attempt to share it with other AA members in my local community, people who I had known in AA. And I became somewhat of a pest because I began to notice that no one wanted to talk about the book. It was very strange that nobody in AA wanted to talk about the big book. In fact, it got to be where they would see me coming, and I think they would leave because they know that I was going to start worrying them about this thing. And I would continue to study. It was about after, 2 years, year and a half of study that I first met Charlie, and I was to introduce Charlie. And I don't know where, I guess I would give this up if I hadn't met Charlie. But I was asked to introduce a speaker at the Al-Anon conference. And Charlie was a speaker, he and his wife. And I never should forget the night we met. And I told him I was very disappointed when I seen this guy as I introduced him that night, because I looked on the program and it said his name was Charlie P., and I had never met him. And I told him I was disappointed because I thought it was going to be Charlie Pride, and this guy wasn't even the right color. He couldn't sing either. But I introduced him that night, and I remember we sat on the stage together, and I remember I go by that Holiday Inn where it was. I think about that. Mm-hmm. And we would, as soon as the meeting was over, we were standing there talking. And I began to talk to him about my favorite subject, the Big Book. Finally, after I got to know him, we talked, and I told him about my study of the Big Book. And he was very interested. In fact, he told me, at the same time we lived 225 miles apart, he said he had been doing some studying on the Big Book for his own benefit. So we met there that night, and I think this has been a relationship that has only could have happened in Alcoholics Anonymous, because our only thing is our mutual interest in the Big Book. We began to study together and study when we were apart, and it become a thing that we got between ourselves, and we would study and we would make notes. And then when I would see Charlie at different conferences and things, we would share our notes and put these little pieces of the puzzle together and to unlock and find out the plan in the Big Book. And we did this from 73, spring of 73, until 1977. After about 4 years, we had put together some concept of the book. People would see us doing this at conferences, and the first guy that was involved in this, he asked to sit in. And Charlie asked me, was it all right? It had been a thing between Charlie and I for about 2 years. And one day he said, you think it's all right for Tony to come in? Because they knew he heard that we were studying the Big Book in our rooms. So I said, yeah, I guess it don't make me no difference. So Tony was the third person involved in this. Then after that, another 1 or 2 people found out about it, and finally at a conference, we would have 15, 16 people in a room studying the Big Book and listening to the Big Book study. 1977, the first Big Book study was actually put on for a group, and one of the guys in the room said, I would like for you to come out to my group and do this. So we just couldn't imagine a group wanting to hear the Big Book study or whatever. It wasn't a Big Book study. It didn't have a name or whatever it was. So we did this in Lawton, Oklahoma, and this is where the first tapes were made. These tapes were finally, really the beginning of the Big Book study. Long about that time, I believe in 78, 79, we went to do a Big Book study in Omaha, Nebraska, I believe it was, and Wesley was invited. The guy said, well, this guy that was putting it on said it'd be a nice weekend. We'll do it Saturday and Sunday. And he said, he thought about Wesley, who was very interested in the Big Book. He would be a good person to have come to speak that Saturday night while y'all doing the Big Book study during the day. And so they invited Wes to come up and talk. That was another memorable occasion. I had met Wes before, but not really been a part of his life in that way. But that particular night, the day we met, Charlie and Wes and I, and Wes was really enthused with the big book study. He had been a student of the book for many years, but he had never been able to get into the depth of the explanation of how the book really worked. And I'll never forget his expression when he met Charlie and I and he heard the big book study. He was kind of mad. Because he said, "How did you guys do that? Who y'all think y'all are?" You know. And we became instant friends. It was there, you know, Wes was really we wonder where the big book study would have ever become anything without Wes's parents. Because, you know, Charlie and I would do a few big book studies around at this time in our part of the country. But in 1980 at the International Convention, Wes approached us about the tapes, and we told them they weren't ours. They belonged to whoever taped them. We had no connection with them except they just taped them. And he wanted to know what he could do with them. And we said, "Well, what do you mean? They're not ours. You can do anything you want to do with them." So in that particular year, he asked us if it would be all right if he could give away 100 sets of big book tapes at the International Luncheon in New Orleans. And you'd have to really know Wes, like John and all of us do. Wesley had a way of getting things done. Mostly Wesley's way. And Wesley was over the luncheon, so he had 1,500 people there, so he seated the people. He knew where everyone would be. He seated them. So he had the whole plan of seating the guests, so he knew where each person would be sitting. So he gave away 100 sets of tapes, but these people won the tapes as door prizes, but they really didn't win them. Wes picked out who was going to win them. And he let these people win these tapes that would go back to every state and every territory and every country, so they would go all over the world. And I think this was really the thing that made the big book study become the big book seminars and all the things that the information got out to everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous. Since that time, you know, the big book seminars began and Wesley started. And the other big books, Charlie and I had had the opportunity to go all, you know, here in Canada and all over the United States and even into Australia with the big book study. And Charlie and I, by the way, we just came back from Australia over 5 weeks and did 8 big book studies in 5 weeks. And this is the wonders of the whole miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous is that the ideas and people. This is the big book study is the same thing. The ideas of the first 100 still being added to the ideas and lives of other people to carry the message to Alcoholics Anonymous into the lives of people. And Charlie and I, we still feel it all that we have an opportunity to be a part of Alcoholics Anonymous and particularly a part of the big book study.
And if we're going to study the big book this weekend, which is of course what we're here for, we need to again look back a little bit at the history of it, look a little bit about how this information came into being, and look at what happened to Bill and Bob and the first 40 people in Alcoholics Anonymous in order to be able to really see and understand the sequence that the big book is written in. And we know that in the summer of 1933, Bill Wilson was a practicing alcoholic that had almost reached the end of his rope. He had lost everything that he held near and dear to him practically. He had lost his means of livelihood. He could no longer work. He could no longer function in society. He was afraid he was going to lose his wife and almost lost all of his self-respect and et cetera and et cetera. And we know that because of this brother-in-law of Bill Wilson's, Dr. Leonard Strong, and because of the fact that Bill's mother was also a doctor, Bill was placed in a hospital in New York City called the Towns Hospital. And while in the Towns Hospital, he was treated by and met a little doctor named Dr. Silkworth. And after a few days, when Dr. Silkworth had withdrawn Bill from alcohol, he sat down with Bill and began to explain to him some ideas that he had gained concerning alcoholism itself. And he said to Bill, Bill, I don't necessarily believe that alcohol is a matter of willpower. He said, I don't believe that alcoholism is a matter of moral character. I don't believe that alcoholism is a matter of sin. He said, I believe people like you are suffering from a full-blown disease called alcoholism. And he said, I believe it is a twofold disease, and it's a very unique disease. He said, I believe it is a disease of the body as well as a disease of the mind. And he said, I believe people like you have developed an allergy to alcohol. And he said, every time you take a drink, you seem to trigger a craving within your body that makes it virtually impossible for you to stop drinking after you've taken that first one or two drinks. And he said, this doesn't happen to the majority of people. He said, it only happens to about 1 person out of 10. And he said, this reaction you have to alcohol is an abnormal reaction. And he said, therefore, I believe you have become physically allergic to alcohol. And he said, in addition to that, you have developed an obsession of the mind. And he said, this obsession of the mind is so strong that it doesn't make any difference how badly you want to stop drinking. It doesn't make any difference how well you can see what alcohol does to you. From time to time, your mind will be unable to see what alcohol does. Your mind will tell you that it's okay to drink, and you'll take a drink, and then that will trigger the allergy, and then you'll be unable to stop drinking, and you'll end up drunk and sick and in all kinds of trouble. He said, I think people like you have a disease called alcoholism. Now, we know that Bill left that town's hospital in the summer of 1933, and for the first time in his life, he understood what was wrong with him. Always before, he had thought it was willpower, and he had thought it was moral character, and he had thought it was sin, and all those other things people had said about us over the years. But for the first time in his life, he had knowledge about his actual disease. And he assumed that now that I know what's wrong with me, it'll never be necessary for me to take another drink of alcohol as long as I live. We also know that in a relatively short period of time, his obsession of the mind became operative, and his mind told him it'd be okay to drink. And Bill took a drink, and he triggered the allergy, and he was unable to stop drinking. About a year later, in the summer of 1934, Bill was put back in the town's hospital again, and again under Dr. Silkworth. This time, Dr. Silkworth pronounced Bill as incurable, told Bill's wife that this guy is going to either die during delirium tremens, or he's going to go absolutely insane, and he'll have to be locked up for the rest of his life. And Bill heard the doctor say this, and Bill said, they didn't need to tell me, I almost knew this myself. He withdrew Bill from alcohol in the summer of 1934, and Bill left that hospital, and this time fear sobered him up for a while. But we also know that on Armistice Day, 1934, Bill's mind told him it would be okay to take a drink. Bill took the drink, he triggered the allergy, and he was unable to stop drinking. And as John said a while ago, near the end of November, Bill was visited by an old school friend called Ebby Thatcher. And Ebby Thatcher came into Bill's kitchen, and he gave Bill 2 other pieces of information. Now, Bill already knew what the problem was. He had received that from Dr. Silkworth. But Ebby sat down, and he explained to Bill that people like they were had become absolutely powerless over alcohol. And he said, people like us who have become absolutely powerless over alcohol, if we wish to recover, then we're going to have to find a power greater than we are. And he said that power is going to have to be greater than alcohol also. And he said it seems as though most of us have tried all human powers, and it seems to none of them have worked for us. And he said if we are to recover, we'll have to find a power not only greater than we are, but greater than human power, period. And he said, Bill, about the only way we can find that is through what's called a vital spiritual experience. And for the first time in his life, Bill could see what the answer to his problem was, or what the solution would be, a power greater than he was, to be found through a vital spiritual experience. Ebby also told Bill about this strange group of people called the Oxford groups, and he told him about these little 6 concepts that some of them had been using in their life, and he said if we use these concepts to the best of our ability, these ideas or steps or suggestions or whatever you want to call them, he said if we use these, it will be a practical program of action, and he said that action in turn will lead us to the vital spiritual experience, and we can have it and then we can recover. So for the first time in his life, Bill now knew 3 things. He knew the problem from Dr. Silkworth. He knew the need for the vital spiritual experience, which, as John explained, came really from Dr. Jung over in Switzerland. and he knew a little practical program of action that had been given to them by the Oxford groups. We know that shortly thereafter that, Bill had to go back in the town's hospital again to be withdrawn from alcohol, and again under Dr. Silkworth. And while in the hospital, Bill was visited by Ebby Thatcher again, and he and Bill put into their life, and especially into Bill's life there in the town's hospital, to the best of their ability, they put into action these little 6 steps from the Oxford groups. And as the result of that, Bill had what he always referred to as a vital spiritual experience there in the town's hospital. Now, I'm not sure today any of us really know what happened to Bill, but we do know that was about December the 10th or the 11th of 1934. And we do know that Bill didn't die until January of 1971. And we do know that it was never necessary for him to take another drink of alcohol as long as he was alive. We know that immediately after leaving the town's hospital, Bill began to work with other alcoholics in New York City. We know also that he had no success with any of these people. And he became very, very despondent. He would sing them up out of the gutters, and he'd jerk them off the bar stools, and he was really trying to give to them what he had received himself. But none of them seemed to want to respond to it. Bill went back to Dr. Silkworth one day, and he said, "Doctor, I've been trying to help other alcoholics and give to them what has been given to me so freely," but he said none of them seemed to want it. And the doctor said, "Well, Bill, probably what you're trying to do," he said, "you're probably trying to cram that great spiritual experience you had here in the town's hospital down their throat." And he said that you don't cram anything down the throat of an alcoholic. You'll just vomit her right back up every time. He said, "What you need to do with those people is the same thing I did with you." He said, "You need to sit down and explain to them the exact nature of their illness." He said, "No alcoholic knows what his problem is." He said, "Every alcoholic I talk to wants to know 2 things. Why can't I drink like I used to? And why can't I quit now that I want to?" And he said, if you'll sit down with them and explain to them the physical allergy of the body that ensures they can never safely drink again, and if you will explain to them the obsession of the mind that ensures that they will not be able to quit on their own strength unaided, you'll be able to get their interest. And he said, then after you get their interest, then you can talk to them about a spiritual means of recovery. He said, explain to them the exact nature of their illness. Now, we know that almost immediately after that, Bill went to Akron, Ohio on a business trip. We also know that the business deal fell through and that Bill was standing in the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel, and Bill looked in the bar off of the lobby where the lights were low and the smoke was thick and the music was playing and the laughter was great, and his mind said, Bill, you could go in there and have a Coca-Cola or a soft drink and you'll feel better. But also his mind said, if you do that, you're going to end up drunk. And we know that Bill looked around on the wall and he found a church directory. And his mind had remembered how back in New York City, even though he had never helped anybody, he himself had felt better every time he had tried. And he looked on his church directory and he got some names and some phone numbers and he began to call some people. And we know that finally he was put in contact with Henrietta Seiberling, who in turn put him in contact with this surgeon in Akron named Dr. Bob Smith. We also know that Bill went to visit with Dr. Bob Smith. And he took to Dr. Bob Smith some information that Dr. Bob had never heard before. Bill sat down with Dr. Bob and he explained to him the exact nature of his illness. And this absolutely blows our mind today when we think about this, because we must remember that Bill was an old conning, lying, manipulating New York City stock investment counselor, speculator, entrepreneur, whatever you want to call him. And he sat down with this trained surgeon, this trained doctor, and he explained to the doctor what was wrong with his body and his mind. Now, normally the doctor would have said, who in the hell are you to be telling me what's wrong with my body and my mind? But the information had such depth and was so interesting that Dr. Bob bought into it almost immediately. And we know that shortly thereafter, Dr. Bob recovered from the disease of alcoholism. And this made 2 people that knew 3 things. They both now understood what the problem is. They had got that from Dr. Silkworth. They both understood what the solution is. They had gotten that from Dr. Jung through Roland H. through Eddy. and they both understood the practical program of action which had come to them from the Oxford groups. And through the application of the practical program of action, they both had undergone a vital spiritual experience, and it was never necessary for either one of them to take another drink as long as they lived after they had had their vital spiritual experience. And where we're going to start today is looking a little bit at that era of time, looking at a little of the history out of the big book itself. Let's jump forward to the second edition. And there I think we can see what transpired after Bill and Bob met in Akron, Ohio. And that is on Roman numeral 15, last paragraph on the bottom of the page.
The spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck at Akron, Ohio, in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and the Akron physician. 6 months earlier, the broker had been relieved of his drug obsession by a sudden spiritual experience following a meeting with an alcoholic friend who had been in contact with the Oxford group of that day. And this was what John and Charlie talked about, the meeting of Ebby and Bill. Because Ebby had been in contact with the Oxford group. He was greatly helped by the late Dr. Silkworth, a New York specialist in alcoholism, who is now accounted no less than a medical saint by AA members. No story of the early days in our society appears in the next pages. From this doctor, the broker had learned the grave nature of alcoholism. It was from Dr. Silkworth that he learned the exact nature of his problem, the first step. Now, though he could not accept all the tenets of the Oxford groups, he was convinced of the need of moral inventory, confession of personality defects, restitution to those harmed, helpfulness to others, and the necessity of belief in the dependence upon God. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker had worked hard with many alcoholics on a theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic. John talked about that. Bill, after he had his changed experience in his life, he began to work with other alcoholics and getting them off the bar stools. And immediately he took them to chapter 5. He immediately told them how to find this power. He talked about his spiritual experience, and he helped no one. But he succeeded only in keeping himself sober. The broker had gone to Akron on a business venture, which had collapsed. And just before he went to Akron was the time he went to talk to Dr. Silkworth, and Dr. Silkworth told him to quit telling him about the recovery, start off showing him what the problem is. And so he went to Akron, which collapsed, which leaving him fear he might start drinking. He suddenly realized in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. That alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician. As the story goes, it said the physician had tried spiritual means. And remember Dr. Bob, as they met in 1935, we would look at this. Dr. Bill had actually become an active member of the Oxford group for the 6 months. In fact, he had been trying to go for a while he was drinking before he went back to the towns after Ebby had come to see him. And then after he got out of the towns, he became an active member of the Oxford group for 6 months. But as he and Dr. Bob met that spring, Dr. Bob had been in the Oxford group in Akron, Ohio, and he had been an active member for about 2.5 years. He had a lot more experience in the program than Bill, but he couldn't stay sober. Dr. Bob had thought the idea of the solution to alcoholism was in the spiritual realm, and he had the planned program of action of the Oxford groups. But he couldn't recover because he didn't understand the problem. He didn't have the first step. Now, when Bill came to him, this is what he brought to him. He had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and his hopeless, physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never been able to muster. Now, once Bill gave him the problem, then he could apply the recovery part and the solution. As the story goes, Dr. Bob was in the Oxford group, And these little group members, and they met at Henry T. Williams, and their pictures on the wall. Each Sunday they would meet at their house. And it was part of the Oxford group principles, and we can see our steps within there. They had a way of sitting around in the way in the Oxford groups, and they would discuss their shortcomings and what God had done for them. And each Sunday these 6 people would meet, and Henrietta was in the group, and Ann and Dr. Bob and Henry T., and they would sit around and discuss these things. Everybody would share what God had done for them in their lives, except Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob was a physician. He was very guarded at that time about his alcoholism, and he wouldn't discuss it. And finally, Henrietta told Ann, she said, "I'm sick and tired of him coming to the meeting every Sunday. Everybody else talks but him, and we all know he's got a drinking problem. If we don't say something, we're going to bring it up." Henrietta was a fireball. And finally, one Sunday, Dr. Bob finally did say, "Well, you people have been so nice to me," and said, "I got something that might cost me my profession." He said, "What I'd like to share with you all," he said, "I got a problem with drinking and I can't stop." Somebody in the group said, "Well, Dr. Bob, would you like for us to pray for you?" And he said, "Yeah." So all these people, little 6 people in the Oxford group, they got on their knees and they had a prayer for Dr. Bob, with some help from Dr. Bob. And now this was many weeks before Bill come to Akron, but these people continued to pray for help of Dr. Bob. Henrietta she said, as this time passed, one night she was in her kitchen after leaving one of the Oxford group members, and God spoke to her within her being, not in there. And Henrietta said, God spoke to her and said, "Dr. Bob shouldn't drink any more whiskey, not even one drop." And she said, "Well, I wonder what that means," because they couldn't interpret it, because they didn't know the first step at that time. So she called Dr. Bob up and told him to come over. And the Oxford group members had an idea, which became our 11th step, some of the concepts. They had an idea that you could receive guidance from God, what they called guidance. They also felt that one member could receive guidance for another member. In other words, God could speak to you and you were supposed to tell me. Charlie says we still have some people in AA that receive our guidance and give it to us. But so Henrietta said that she called Dr. Bob up and said, "Dr. Bob, I have some guidance from God for you." Dr. Bob came over and Henrietta said, "God said you shouldn't drink any more whiskey, not even one drop." And Dr. Bob said, "Well, what does that mean?" Henrietta said, "I don't know." But these people continued to pray for help for Dr. Bob. So Henrietta always said that when Bill called and said, "I'm from New York and I'm an alcoholic and I need to talk to another alcoholic," she said immediately she knew that was the answer to the prayers of the people in the Oxford group. So she told him to come right over. She said she was not shocked when he showed up. And he brought to Dr. Bob the first step. He showed Dr. Bob what his problem was. Dr. Bob already knew the solution was spiritual, and he had the planned program of action. But once Bill showed him the first step, this was the key, and he had pursued it, and he was recovered. Hence, these 2 men sent out to work frantically upon the alcoholics arriving in the ward of the Akron City Hospital. Their first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA member number 3. He never had another drink, and they carried him these 3 things. This work at Akron continued through the summer. In 1935, there were many failures, but occasionally heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized at this time. And the first AA group was formed there at Dr. Bob's house, and it later moved to the King's School. A second group promptly took shape in New York. We followed 1937 and started a third in Cleveland. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic ideas in Akron and New York, who were to try and form groups in other cities. In 1937, the number of members having sufficient sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership and new light in the dark world of the alcoholic.
I think we need to remember at this point And this John was talking about this earlier. At this time, there were approximately 40 people sober. And those 40 people were in these three little groups, one in Akron, one in New York City, one in Cleveland, and one or two or three scattered around here and there. Now, these 40 people had all been using the same three pieces of information. They first all had to find out what the problem is. And we know again that information had come from Dr. Silkworth. Then they had to find out the solution. And we know that came from Dr. Yoon through Ebby to Bill. Then they had to find out the practical program of action. And we know that that came from the Oxford groups, which their ideas had evolved into these 6 little steps that these 40 people were using. So in the summer of 1937, there was 40 of them that had all recovered from the disease using the same 3 pieces of information. And when Bill went back through Akron again on a business trip and stopped to visit with Dr. Bob, and they sat down and counted heads, I think this was the first time that they realized we might have the answer to this thing called alcoholism. And that's when they called a meeting of the people there in Akron. And there was about 18 people at that meeting. And that's where they decided to do those 3 things. Number 1, to build that chain of hospitals. Now, the first floor was going to be maybe for withdrawal from alcohol. The second floor maybe as a treatment center. The third floor maybe to retrain alcoholics so that they could have a job after they recovered. We laugh about that today. We don't know any alcoholics that need to be retrained. Well, most of us have got 4 or 5 occupations anyhow you have to have if you're a practicing alcoholic. And maybe the 4th floor was going to be a live-in workout arrangement where they could pay rent and live under controlled conditions. We know also that they were going to hire this group of paid missionaries and train them to go throughout the world in order to carry this information to alcoholics all over the world. And we also know they decided to write the book for 2 basic reasons. Number 1, to put this information down in a written form so it would not be changed in the future, so it would not become garbled, but also, number 2, to make a hell of a lot of money. Because if you're going to build those hospitals and you're going to hire those missionaries, that takes a lot of cash. So one of the ideas was to make the money off the book in order to do that. Now, they made their decision to write the book in the summer of 1937. They said, Bill, we want you to write it. You know more about it than any of the rest of us. You've been sober longer than the rest of us. And he'd been sober at that time about 3 years, somewhere in that area. And they said, as you write the book, then we want to look at it. They said, this is to be the collective knowledge and experience and wisdom of all 40 of we people. And this is to give the same identical information that we had to have in order to recover from the disease. And this is what we're going to give to the world, is that information. Joe?
Okay. It was now that the struggling group thought to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publishing of this volume. The membership has reached 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been named, is now be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. And that's very strange. You know, today we say Alcoholics Anonymous, and we don't really know, what are we talking about. Alcoholics Anonymous originally was a book. It was a title of a book which contained the program of the first 100 people. And once these nameless people produced this book, they named the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And then this nameless group of people took the name off the book and called themselves Alcoholics Anonymous. So there are 2 Alcoholics Anonymous, one in the book and the other a fellowship. Now, in 1939, it was obvious that they were pretty much identical. That is, the people in the fellowship Alcoholics Anonymous, quite naturally, practiced the same program they had just set down in their book. And this is why they wanted it set down, so as John said, so it wouldn't get garbled. And the message in the book has been unchanged, so it isn't garbled. But the message, the program in the fellowship, people had tended to change. Word of mouth programs, they will add to things, and in the fellowship we have added our little things and took some away, and so where our program in the fellowship don't hardly resemble the program in the book anymore. They say go to meetings and don't drink and you'll be all right, and you skip this step and take this, and you do what you want to do. And sometimes, I look at Alcoholics Anonymous, and thank God for the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, that we can still go back to the program, Alcoholics Anonymous. And I think that we are blessed that we live in a time where we still this close to our program, and we're still alcoholics. And I think about those people that meet on Sunday morning in those great churches. If you go to one of those churches sometime and you listen to their program and then read their book, they don't resemble none whatsoever. And it's almost that way in Alcoholics Anonymous sometimes, because we tend by improving and adding things, we get completely away from what our program was. And I say, that this is what we're going to be talking about this weekend. We'll be talking about, not about the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're not going to discuss the program in the fellowship. That would be very difficult to discuss. We're going to be discussing the program in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, and the program that we had in 1939 when the book was first written. And thank God we still have it in its purest form as it was developed, and it's unchanged. And we would like, if we could just get back to the program of 1939, how much it would change the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Sometimes I think today you go into an AA meeting and they've changed our program around so much that you get in a meeting and you sit there and listen, and sometimes it's difficult to tell what kind of meeting you're in. Sometimes they talk about everything but recovery from alcoholism. They talk about everything but the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, Joe and I got in one of those meetings not long ago, and we were sitting there listening, and I couldn't really hear anything about alcoholism. And I finally turned to Joe and I said, Joe, where in the hell are we? And he said, I don't know. He said, I guess this must be BB. And I said, BB, what's that? And he said, beats the hell out of me, but it sure ain't AA. On Roman numeral 20, just a couple of figures here give us an idea of what was going on in those days. It said public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For this, there were two principal reasons: the large numbers of recoveries and reunited homes. These made their impressions everywhere. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. And it's quite easy to see that back in the beginning in 1939, when the fellowship program and the Big Book program were identical, that 75% of the people who wanted to stay sober stayed sober. I wonder what that percentage is today of the people coming to AA. I wonder if it is 50% today. I wonder sometimes is it 25% today. I wonder sometimes is it 10% today. We've got to believe that if we could get our fellowship program back to what the original program was as contained in the Big Book Alcoholics Anonymous, surely we could increase the percentage of people recovering from the disease. I think one of the greatest tragedies in the world today is we've gone out and we've got millions and millions of people to come to the Fellowship Alcoholics Anonymous, but nobody's telling them what they need to do in order to recover. And I think that is our responsibility. If AA should someday fail, it won't be because of these new people coming to us. It won't be because of the ideas coming in from the outside. It'll be because we people in AA are no longer supporting our own program of recovery. And I think if we could get back to that, as outlined in the Big Book, most certainly we could help a lot more people today. So many times we're afraid we'll run somebody off by talking about God, or we're afraid we'll offend somebody by talking about the steps. And really, that's the only recovery we have. The 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous outlined in the Big Book, which leads us to a vital spiritual experience or a God as we understand Him. And I think that's our responsibility, to give that to the new people coming into the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, we've always said if we ever found a reason to study the table of contents, we'd take a look at it. Today, I think we found the reason. Let's go to the table of contents, Roman numeral 5, and take a look at how the book might be divided up. Now, you got some handout sheets in your portfolio or in that envelope you have. If you'd like to get those out, we're going to be looking at them from time to time. There's going to be one or two just a little bit different of what we're going to flash up here on the screen, but basically they will be the same. And your first sheet will be a little bit different, dealing with the big book goes or the table of contents. Joe?
Okay. When we look at the table of contents, chart up. We're going to look at the three goals or purposes of the big book and the procedure in which we're going to be meeting those in the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous. There you go. Sorry, lost it. Okay. And the first thing we're going to do is goal 1, what is the problem? And as we say, and we can look at, if we can look at this in great simplicity, there is one procedure to solving problems. I don't care what type of it might be. Doesn't make any difference what type of problem it is. There's one procedure that is basically used in solving problems. The first step in solving any problem is to find out what is the problem. I don't care if you're fixing your car or making a dress or making a cake. It's what is the problem. We're going to use the big book. We're going to use the doctor's opinion and Bill's story to show us step 1, and that's a problem statement. The problem is that we're powerless over alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable. That is the problem. That is the foundation of the process. And then once we establish that, once we establish what is the problem, then it's from the first step that we can determine the second step. We have to have the first step to find the second step. Because if we understand that the problem is powerless, then we also understand that the solution would be power, obviously. And we're going to talk about came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And we're going to use in the big book, chapters 2, 3, and 4, there is a solution, more about alcoholism, we agnostic. This section of the textbook will tell us about the solution, the power to overcome the powerlessness. And once we establish those two foundations, if the problem is powerless and the solution is power, then the next thing is, how do we find this power? And this is the main purpose of the book, is to enable us to find a power greater than ourselves, which will solve our problems. And this is the third and main purpose of the book. And this will be in chapters 5, 6, and 7, how it works, into action and working with others, which contains the 10-step plan of recovery. So we'll be looking at three things. Number 1, step 3 through 12. We'll be looking at what is the problem, what is the solution to the problem, and how do we find the solution. This is a simple process of solving any problem, and the book is written along that simple outline.
Now then, let's go over and take a look at the preface for just a moment. Now, I have a second edition in front of me. Most of you probably have a third edition. The first paragraph may read a little bit different in the preface, but the second paragraph will read the same, which is what we really want to look at. Mine says this is the second edition of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, which made its first appearance in April of 1939. More than 300,000 copies of the first edition are now in circulation. But then mine says, because this book has become the basic text for our society, and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists a sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched. And within that last paragraph, there's a couple of ideas that we feel we need to look at. Number one, we see the words basic text. And I think when we see the words basic text, we are alerted to the type book that we have in front of us. You know, there's all different kinds of books. There's books that are called biographies and autobiographies, and there's books called novels, and there's novels written on fact and novels written on fiction, and etc. Probably the book that most of us are familiar with the most would be a novel. A novel is a book that if it's written right, in the first chapter it will introduce the people and the plot, and then as you read the novel from chapter 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, the plot thickens and it becomes exciting, and oh, if it's right, you just grab into that novel and it's so exciting you can hardly lay it down. When you reach the end of it, if they finish up the way I like to see them do it, they all rode off into the sunset together, holding hands, and they lived happily ever after. A novel is a book that we may read only one time in our lives. We might read it twice. You know, an old cold dreary day, we got nothing to do, we look over the bookshelf to find something to read, we see the novel, we remember that we enjoyed it, and we may take it down and read it a second time, but if we do, chances are that's the only time we'll ever read that novel. Now, the book that I have in front of me, though, says it is the basic text. And when I see the words basic text, I think I'm alerted to the fact that I've got a textbook in front of me, not a novel. And a textbook is an entirely different kind of book. A textbook is a book that is used to convey information. It is used to take information from the mind of one human being, put it down on a piece of paper in the written word, and then the user of the textbook, as they read it and study it, that information is transferred then to their mind. And really that's all a textbook is for. It's simply to transfer or convey information from the mind of one human being to the mind of another human being. And that's all teaching is about. Now, I always had aversions to the words textbook and teaching and all that kind of stuff, but today I realize it's simply a means of transferring information. And the trouble with most alcoholics before coming to AA is they don't know what's wrong with them. And since they don't know what's wrong with them, they don't know what the solution is. And since they don't know what the solution is, then they keep taking the wrong actions because they keep trying to find the wrong solution. Now, the textbook Alcoholics Anonymous is simply going to take information from the minds of the first 40 people and transfer that information through the written word to the mind of the alcoholic that lives today. And as that alcoholic that lives today absorbs that new information, then they will be able to see what their problem is. And they'll be able to see what the solution is. And then they'll be able to find a practical program of action necessary to find that solution. And that's all this particular textbook is about, is alcoholism and the recovery therefrom. Now, we have textbooks on things such as mathematics. Let's say my friend Joe here knows nothing at all about mathematics. Joe can't add and subtract. He can count to 21 if he's standing there naked and got everything where it's supposed to be. I said that one day and he looked at me and he said, "No, Charlie, 20 and a half, that's all we can do." And let's say I walk up to Joe and I say, "Joe, in chapter 5, I've got a textbook on mathematics here, and in chapter 5 there's problems dealing with algebra. And I want you to go to chapter 5 and work those algebra problems." And Joe would open that book up to chapter 5, he'd look at the algebra problems, and they look just like so much Greek to Joe. He can't even add and subtract, much less work algebra problems. He closes the book, throws it down, and may never pick it up again. But if I say, "Joe, in chapter 1 in this textbook on mathematics, we've got information and problems dealing with addition and subtraction. And if you'll read that chapter and study it and ask questions when you need to, by the time you reach the end of the chapter, you'll be able to add and subtract." And sure enough, Joe learns how to add and subtract. And then I say, based on what you learned in chapter 1, now you could go to chapter 2 and you can learn how to multiply and divide. And he does that. And then he goes to chapter 3 and he learns about fractions and decimals. And gradually we increase Joe's knowledge by the transference of this information until the time he gets to chapter 5, by golly, he can read and study and learn how to do algebra problems. I think the greatest mistake being made in AA today is people come in the door of AA and we hand them a big book and we say, go to chapter 5 and do what it says and you'll be all right. And they go to chapter 5 and they open it up and they see the 12 steps and they look just like so much Greek to them. Step 1 says we're powerless over alcohol. He said, hell, I'm not powerless over nothing. He doesn't know what that means. Step 2 said we came to believe that in the power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. He said, man, don't tell me I'm crazy. Yeah, I do stupid things, but I'm not crazy. And if you're not powerless and you're not nuts, then you certainly don't need step 3 to straighten that mess out. And he closes his book and lays it down. He may not ever pick it up again for years. All textbooks are written in a certain sequence. All assume that the reader of the textbook knows very little about the subject matter. All start at a very simple place. And then gradually as we use the book, the knowledge increases until finally we reach the goal that we set out to do in the first place. And I hope, if nothing else, this weekend we'll be able to see the sequence of the chapters, the sequence of the information presented to us out of the big book, as laid out by the first 40 people in the beginning. I hope this weekend we'll really be able to see that this is a textbook, and it's most certainly not a novel. Because it's helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists a sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume, dealing with recovery, the first 164 pages, have been left largely untouched. The big book has undergone 3 editions. The first one in 1939, the second in 1955, the third in 1976. Now, the only changes that's been made in the book regards the stories in the back of the book. By the early 1950s, it became apparent that the membership of Alcoholics Anonymous no longer was reflected by those stories in the back of the book. Most of those were low-bottom drunks. All of them were men practically, and most of them were up in age. But by the early 1950s, that had changed. The bottom was becoming higher and higher, age lower and lower. The number of women coming in was more and more. And they found it necessary to change stories in the back of the book and come out with a second edition. They did identically the same thing in 1976. But the actual recovery portion has been left untouched. You know, this book is approaching now, getting close to 50 years old. And it amazes me that we alcoholics have been able to leave the recovery program alone. You know, it's worked so good that we don't dare change the damn thing. Usually we would go in there and rewrite the whole thing. But when I'm reading this thing today, whether I'm reading from this red book that Joe has over here, which by the way is a first edition, first printing big book, or whether I'm reading from the second edition that I have in front of me, or whether we're reading from the third edition that most of you probably have today, we're going to be reading the same identical information all the way through the book. The recovery program has been left largely untouched. And that's what we're going to talk about. The recovery program in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Not fellowship, not somebody else's program, but the recovery program in the big book itself. Let's go to the foreword of the first edition for just a moment. In the foreword of the first edition, it said, we are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. And again, 2 short ideas. First, we are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from this seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. We know that by the time the book was published, the 40 in 1937 had changed to 100 in 1939. And I think what it's going to tell me is that this book is not a one-author book. You know, most books I read are authored by one person. And with my keen intellectual alcoholic mind, if I don't agree with what they say, I say, well, who are they to think they're smarter than I am? And I usually ignore that information. But we can see here the big book is not really authored by one person. It's authored by 100 people. You know, they told Bill in the beginning, yes, we want you to write the book. But they said, Bill, this is not going to be your book. That this is going to be the collective knowledge and experience and wisdom of all of we people in AA. And they said, as you write the book, we want to see the chapter. And we reserve the right to add to, change around, delete from anything we want to. And when it's all done, it'll be the book that belongs to all of us. Now, if I argue with a book today, I'm not arguing with one author, I'm arguing with 100. And those 100 have recovered from the same thing that's killing me if I'm a practicing alcoholic. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. Precisely how we have recovered. Now, Joe and I have been around AA long enough to know that the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. Nobody can make anybody in AA do anything they don't want to do. You know, you can come to an AA meeting, you can stand up in the middle of the floor and say, I don't like you people at all. I don't like your old big book. I hate the 12 steps, and I can just barely stand your lousy old coffee. But I'm going to be a member of AA because I've got a desire to stop drinking. And nobody can do a thing about that. You know, you don't even have to be sober to be a member of AA. It helps if you are, but you really don't have to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. But those things all deal with requirements for membership in the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, we're not going to talk about the fellowship this weekend. We're going to talk about recovery. And the purpose of the book is to show other people precisely, exactly, how the first 100 recovered from the disease of alcoholism. And if I want to recover as they did, then it stands to reason that if I would follow their precise set of instructions, then I should be able to receive the same recovery that they did. It's kind of like making a cake. You make a cake and I eat it, and oh golly, it's great. If the taste is right, the texture is right, it just goes down just as smooth, and I say, oh man, that's good cake. Who made that cake? And you'll say, I made it. And I'll say, would you tell me how you made that cake? And you say, sure, I'll be glad to. And you sit down and you take out a pencil and a piece of paper and you write out for me a set of instructions on how you made that cake. Now, we call that a recipe. And that set of instructions you give to me will tell me the ingredients to put in the cake. It'll tell me the quantity of those ingredients to put in the cake. It'll tell me the sequence in which to mix them together. It will tell me the temperature at which to bake it and how long to bake it. Now, if I take your set of instructions into my kitchen, and I follow them exactly as you outlined them, when I get through with that cake and let it cool off and take a bite of it, I can expect it to taste exactly like your cake tasted. But if I, with my keen intellectual alcoholic mind, take your set of instructions in my kitchen, and I say, now look, this thing don't need 3 eggs. It just takes 2. It ought to have 2.5 cups of sugar instead of 1.5. Or we'll bake it at 450 instead of 375. When I get through with it and let it cool off and I take a bite of it, certainly I'm going to be biting a piece of cake, but I wonder how closely it would resemble your cake, which was my reason for making the cake in the first place. Now, they have given me in the big book a precise recipe for the recovery from the disease of alcoholism. And if I want to recover as they did, then I can expect, if I follow it, to get the same thing they received. If I don't do it as they did, chances are I'll not get the same kind of recovery that they got. You know, and my purpose in using this book is to recover to the fullest from the disease of alcoholism, but it's left up to me to decide which way I want to go. Joe?
Okay. Doctor's opinion. What is the problem? And again, as John is so beautiful, he talked about, I think very plainly, the big book. Dr. Silkworth went to town. This was in 1930. And, you know, we have to think about Dr. Silkworth, where the world was at this time. Prior to 1930, no one understood anything about alcoholism. And, so since the beginning of time, alcohol has been a problem, and mankind has been searching for this knowledge. In the frustration of the world was what was the problem, because everybody had tried many solutions on the alcoholic, but nobody never understood what the problem was. We didn't even know what type of problem was. Some said it was a weakness. Some said it was a sin. Many, many different theories were going on at this time, since the beginning of time. We have to go back since the beginning of alcohol itself. When as alcohol became a product that man used, immediately a lot of people had a great fun and a lot of social activities and great relaxation with alcohol. But a certain small group of people had problems with it. Now, as we look and see what happened, it was the people who were having all the fun with alcohol, the social drinkers. It was the social drinkers who tried to determine what was wrong with the alcoholic. It wasn't the alcoholic. He probably just kept on drinking, But it was the social drinkers who developed the attitudes, the images of the alcoholic. It was the social drinkers who say, they must be weak. They can't drink like us. They must be sinful. They developed the attitudes of the alcoholic. And down through history, many people have sought what is the problem. And we're one of the oldest, I love to talk about it in the big book. Solomon, he was a social worker of his day. He could solve most problems. Someone came to him about, I think, one of us in the book, in the big book. And they said, he said, beware of the wine as it moves its right in its cup. It's pretty, it's red, but it lashes bites like a serpent, and its sting is like an adder. And he went on to describe some of the things that happens to them.
Everybody was a wino in those days.
Yeah, they was all.
They didn't have distilled spirits.
Yeah, everybody was a wino in those days. He said, beware of that wine. And he said, you will be as one who lies down in the midst of a sea. You sway around a lot. Or sleepeth at the top of a mast. You know how the mast of a ship tosses around? And he said, you will say they have beaten me and I felt it not. Some mornings you feel like somebody was beating on you. And he sure knew some of us fellows, because he said, thine eyes shall behold strange women while you're drinking that wine. And thy heart shall utter perverse things. You'll say a lot of things you don't want to say. But then his final statement, he said, he didn't understand it, but he said, but still yet they will rise in the morning and they seek it yet again. They'll do all these things to them and you get up and you still drink the same thing. Solomon didn't understand it. None of the great minds down through history understood alcoholism. And when we have a problem we can't understand, there's nothing we can do about it. Today we have a problem in our society called cancer. Right today we would very hastily say we're looking for a cure for cancer. We were looking for the solution to cancer. But the research is not looking for the solution. The people in research are trying to find out what is cancer. If we could define what it is, if we knew what it was, the solution is probably already exists if we could find out what it is. We could then find the solution. Now, the world did not understand the problem. We thought it was a sin. We thought it was a weakness. Marty Mann said it would take 2,000 years or thousands of years to wipe out the ignorance that was generated. Even yet today, we still have that ignorance that came from that time. But Dr. Silkworth, he wasn't the first. Finally, was one doctor, I think in the English position, Dr. Trotter, and later on, Dr. Benjamin Rush, a father of American psychiatry in the early 1800s. These two people said it was a disease. But they weren't able to come up with any workable concept. Their work wasn't accepted. It was when Dr. Silkworth went to work in the towns, and he was finally the first person to give some meaning to the disease concept. And he looked at it, and he began to, as he went to work out the towns, now think about this, man. He didn't go there to do this. Dr. Silkworth had wanted a job, was during the Depression, and he wanted to find some work. He couldn't really find a job where he wanted it, and the only place he could find a job was at the town's hospital, working with alcoholics. And back in those days, and see, doctors, people don't go to medical school. to go to work with alcoholics. I mean, they just don't want to do that. You know, they say, well, a lot of medical doctors say, well, drunks don't do what you tell them to do. That's true. And some of them say it's a self-inflicted disease, which is not true. And all of them say, well, alcoholics don't pay their bills no way. So why do you want to work with drunks? You know? This man went there because he couldn't find nothing else to do. And it was there, and during this time, from 1930 to 1933, Dr. Silkworth, remember, saw no one recover from alcoholism. He saw people come month in, year out, get worse and die. He saw people come, get sick, and die. He saw no recovery. And although he began to accumulate this ideas he saw on the fine line every day, he said, I know people say this is a sin and said it's a weakness. He said, but I discern something. There's some force of destruction within these people. There's some force within these people that is driving them to destruction. And he began to discern this force. He began to see what it was. And he began to divide it and accumulate, come up with the idea that part of it is in the body and part of it is the mind. And he was able to, he was the first person to ever give us a working concept, an explanation of what is the problem, the disease of alcoholism. And all the work today, really, in the field of alcoholism and every health services is based on the doctor's opinion in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. Because this is where it originated in the mind of Dr. Silkworth at the Towns Hospital. And he shared this with Bill. And this is his original work, and this is why, you know, it's in the front of the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not in the medical journal, but all work in the field is based on this particular paper.
And naturally, this information that Dr. Silkworth shared with Bill, and this is the information that Bill took to Dr. Bob, and this is what they took to Bill Dotson, the third member, and this is what they took to the first 40, and this is what they took to the first 100. What is the problem? And when they once begin to understand what the problem is, then we begin to see recovery from the disease. So they naturally asked Dr. Silkworth, when they got ready to put this information down, to write for them what the problem really is. And he does this in this chapter, and he calls it the doctor's opinion.
Okay, now this was laughed at when it first came out. This was finally accepted that alcoholism was a disease in 1956. But be sure this weekend you'll go over in the corner and read the letter from the American Medical Association in October 1940, comment on this particular thing. And you'll see where how ideas have changed since that time.
Okay, let's go to Roman numeral page 24. And we start there looking at a few things the doctor had to say. It says, the physician who at our request gave us this letter had been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement he confirms that we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. Now this is the first time we can find where in our written history that the beginning to refer to the fact that the body is sickened as well as the mind. Always before, when they talked about weak will, or they talked about moral character, or they talked about sin, they were always referring to the mind, period. Here we begin to talk about the body is as abnormal as the mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking, just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality or were outright mental defectives. These things were true to some extent, in fact to a considerable extent with some of us. But we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may of course mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we could not otherwise account. Now remember, in 1939 they called this the doctor's theory. The theory that we have an allergy to alcohol. And I think in order for us to really understand what the book is talking about, we've got to be sure that we understand the words that the book uses. You know, a textbook is meant to convey that information from the mind of one human being to another. And unless I understand a word in the same manner as the writer understood it, then when the information comes into my head, it's going to be in the garbled form. It won't be what he intended for me to learn. And I find that for me, especially, when I came to AA, I didn't really know what an allergy is. I thought I did. I knew that an allergy was something that always had some visible manifestations that you could see, some physical changes. For instance, if you're allergic to strawberries and you eat them, you break out in a rash. And the manifestation or the indicator of the allergy is the rash. I knew that if you were allergic to milk and you drank it, you broke out with a bad case of dysentery. And the dysentery is the manifestation or the physical indicator of the allergy to milk. I knew that if you're allergic to ragweeds and you get around them, your eyes itch, your nose itch, you begin to water and you begin to sneeze. And those were visible manifestations that you can actually see take place. Now when I came to AA and they said, Charlie, you're allergic to alcohol. I said, how in the hell can I be? I said, I've been drinking a quart a day for the last 4, 5, 6 years. How in the world can you be allergic to something and drink that much of it at the same time? And I said, when I drink alcohol, I don't break out in rash or bumps all over my body. Whenever I drink alcohol, I don't necessarily have a bad case of dysentery. Once in a while I would, depending on what I've been drinking, but normally I didn't have dysentery. And it did not make my eyes itch, my nose itch, and make them water and make me sneeze. And I said, how in the world can I be allergic to alcohol? Because I could not see any visible manifestations of the allergy. And they said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just know you're allergic and you can't drink it. Well, now that was all right for a little while. But again, with my keen intellectual alcoholic mind, sometimes I need explanations. And I found it necessary for me with that word, and since that time I found it necessary with hundreds of words in the big book to go to the dictionary. And I looked it up in the dictionary, and I found a definition that I think fits me exactly. It says an allergy is an abnormal reaction to any chemical compound, food, beverage, or whatever it might be. An abnormal reaction. Most people can eat strawberries without breaking out in a rash. The abnormal reaction is the rash. The abnormal reaction to milk is the dysentery, and et cetera, and et cetera. So in order for me to see where I'm abnormal to alcohol, I've got to first see what's normal. And you know, to my amazement, I found I didn't know anything about normal reactions at all. Because the way I drank, I'd been doing that for so many years, that had become absolutely normal to me. And all the people I drank with drank like I did. So the way I drank was normal drinking. First time you vomit is abnormal. You do that 10 mornings in a row and it becomes absolutely normal after that. So I found out in order for me to see where I'm abnormal, I had to find out what's normal. And in order to find out what's normal, I had to go to the normal social drinker, or the doctor refers to them as temperate drinkers. And I had to get those people to tell me how they feel whenever they take a drink. What happens to them? And they usually say something like this. They say, I can go home from work and I can be tired, tense, and wrought up, and I can have a drink or two before dinner, and I get a warm, comfortable, relaxing feeling, and then I'll go ahead and have dinner and probably won't have any more to drink that evening. And I don't feel that way at all whenever I drink alcohol. You know, I take a drink of alcohol and I put it up to my mouth, and as it passes over my lips begin to tingle. And when it passes over my teeth begin to chatter up and down. And it hits my tongue, and my tongue begins to grow and swell and expand. And it hits my cheeks, and they go in and out, and I can feel it passing up through my sinus cavities up into my forehead, and I get a feeling in my forehead which is absolutely indescribably wonderful. Now, I haven't even swallowed the damn stuff yet. I just got it in my mouth. When I swallow that alcohol, I can feel it going down through my esophagus, and as it does, my chest begins to grow and expand and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it hits my stomach and it explodes like a bomb, and I feel it racing out through my arms, and they get longer and longer, and it hits my fingers and my hands, and they begin to tingle and vibrate, and at the same time it's going through my legs, and my legs are getting longer and longer, and I'm getting taller and taller, and it hits the bottom of my feet, and they get a hot, intense, burning, exciting feeling, and they want to get up and go somewhere and do something. I don't understand a warm, comfortable, relaxing feeling. I never had that. Alcohol makes me feel different than it does the normal social drinker, and I didn't know that until I went to social drinkers and had them tell me how they feel. So in the first place, I'm abnormal to it in the feeling that I get from it. But I'm also abnormal to it in another way, too. You know, alcohol is a toxic chemical. And when you place enough of it into the human body, you begin to destroy human tissue. And the human body has a way to handle that kind of stuff. If you put something in it that hurts it, the normal reaction is to vomit it up and get it out of there. And I talk to the normal social drinkers, and here's what they tell me. They say, we have 1, 2, or 3 drinks. And they said, we get a slightly tipsy, out of control, nauseous feeling. And they said, we don't like that feeling. So therefore, 1, 2, or 3 drinks is all they want to drink. I don't feel that way when I drink alcohol. I take a drink of alcohol and I get an in-control feeling. I do not get the slightly tipsy, out-of-control feeling. I get an in-control feeling, and I don't get that nauseous feeling. Where they have 1, 2, or 3 drinks, and their body said, let's vomit this stuff up. My body don't say that. When it goes into my system, rather than get the vomiting feeling, my body gets a craving for more of the same, an actual physical craving that demands that I have another drink, and another drink, and another drink, and another drink. You know, all my life I thought normal social drinkers used willpower to not drink more than 1, 2, or 3 drinks because they didn't want to get drunk. Today I find out that isn't true. They don't have to use willpower. They get all they want to drink every time they drink. 1, 2, or 3 drinks. I drank alcohol 26 years. I never remember getting all I wanted to drink. Many times I've had a hell of a lot more than I needed, but I never got all I wanted to drink. That's abnormal. The only difference between normal and abnormal is what do the majority of the people do. 9 people out of 10 have 1, 2, 3 drinks, get that slightly tipsy, out of control, nauseous feeling, and they stop drinking. The alcoholic has 1, 2, or 3 drinks, and it produces a physical craving for more of the same. We don't get that slightly tipsy, out of control, nauseous feeling. The craving is produced, and we have 4, 5, 6. In other words, we're unable to control the amount we consume after we have had 1, 2, or 3 drinks. And since this is considered to be abnormal, then according to the dictionary, we are allergic to alcohol. And for the first time in my life, I understood why I can't drink without getting drunk. First time I ever drank, I got drunk. The last time I ever drank, I got drunk. The first time in my life, I understood what my problem was. Yeah, let's take a 20-minute break. 15 to 20 minutes.